Hi, Duretti. Thanks for joining me for
Hi.
Lead Time Chats.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, so you are a principal engineer and you've spent your
Mm-hmm.
career working your way up. And
Mm-hmm.
congrats, by the way, on your new role at Zipper.
Thank you.
They are very lucky to have you, which I'm sure you know.
Yeah, well, I feel lucky to have them. It's been a dream.
Yeah. And now you're at a point, and we talked about this earlier, where you're really passionate about supporting and coaching
Mm-hmm.
junior
Mm-hmm.
level and mid-level engineers. Can you just
Mm-hmm.
talk a little bit about like what's behind that desire for you?
Yeah, I think it's twofold. One, the promotion to principal didn't happen that long ago. So I
Mhm.
think it's very fresh in my mind what I had to do to get here. And I also think I come from a more community-oriented culture where it's not success if I don't bring people with me.
Mm.
So otherwise, if I'm just the only person in the room that looks like me, then I'm just evidence of structural exclusion. It's not like things are actually getting better. And so
Mhm.
for me, it's sort of like my job as a senior engineer is to make more senior engineers. That's the name of the game.
Mhm.
And I don't know, I feel like I've experienced a lot of gatekeeping, and I want to be the opposite of that.
Mm.
So it's a lot of a lot of emotions and just sort of a lot of
Yeah.
observations, right? And as you know, like the tech sector is highly segregated. So
Mhm.
both by race, gender identity,
Yeah.
all this stuff. And so it just feels like if we want it to be at all better or different or reflect the actual populace, this is the kind of work that has to happen.
Yeah, and I hope that we work in a tech industry where a lot
Hmm.
more senior staff, principal engineers do look like us.
Hmm. Agreed.
Yeah. So what is that like? You've worked with a lot of junior and mid-level
Hmm.
engineers. What do you think they most need that they're not getting right now?
I mean, I honestly think just somebody to level with them. You know what I mean? I think I've touched a lot of hot stoves in my career because nobody warned me it was a hot stove.
Mm,
And ways to preserve one's energy, ways of being a little bit more strategic.
mm,
People, no one's going to tell you don't do that thing. They'll just like let you go for it. And sometimes you can pull it off. It's great if you're doing some sort of project or there's some initiative you care about. But I honestly do feel like it's just no one is telling you the parameters. And I think
yeah.
a lot of people sort of, I know I did, I stumbled around in the dark trying to figure
Hmm.
out what I was interested in, what kinds of things I cared about. Um, so I think just someone to be like, actually don't do that, like that's a bad move. And sometimes it's like, it's your team specific. Like you could be in an engineering culture where the reason something isn't fixed is on purpose, right? You can't get the
Mm.
support for something. And maybe it's not worth dying on that particular hill.
Hmm. So someone to kind of look out for you and
Mm-hmm.
kind of like the straight talk and not just like, oh, you're doing
Mm-hmm.
fine. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that can be pretty harmful. And I think certain people do get that. I
Hmm.
remember early in my career, I was looking for technical mentorship. And
Hmm.
I was like, okay, I observe somebody a couple of years younger than me. People are falling all over themselves to help him. Whereas I'm asking for
Mm.
help specifically, I couldn't get it. I finally had to go to the CTO to be like, hey, I would like some mentorship, please. Like, I know there's ways in which I could level up and be better. And he assigned me to the only other non-white person in engineering at the time.
Mm.
And that didn't end up working out because the relationship wasn't based in anything. I think people
Yeah.
mentor people who remind them of themselves.
Hmm. Well, what do
So,
you think about like, so I think one phenomenon that I found is like people really are eager to mentor women and people of
mm-hmm,
color, and like,
mm-hmm,
but sometimes they're not the best mentors for them because
mm-hmm,
they
mm-hmm,
they come at it with the their own intrinsic motivation is like they want to
mm-hmm,
feel good about themselves,
mm-hmm.
right? Like,
Yeah, yeah, 100%. Or the advice they give, I can't take. Like, I
right.
can't take a lot of the advice that some of the well-meaning white men in my life give me. Like, oh, just
Hmm.
do it. I'm like, "Oh, I can't just do it. Like, I have to sort of
Right.
pave
I'm
some
gonna
sort
be
of path. I gotta
questioned.
smooth
I'm
the
gonna
way.
be like, right.
All of this stuff.
Yeah.
So I think any of the success I've had have all been because of relational aspects in my working life.
Hmm.
I've paved the way by making friends with certain people across the organization, and then that's the way that I can kind of get things done. Just
Hmm.
going off, doing things, you know, oh, I did this thing and I shipped it. Woo! That's not something I can do.
Right. Right. So what do you see as like the ideal path of like, say a junior or mid-level
Mm-hmm.
engineer? Like, do you feel like the manager, is it an external party? Is it the manager? Is it the company and processes? Like, what does that all
It's
look like?
it's tough. I mean, you don't have to get mentorship inside of your company, that's for sure. If you have like a particular career goal inside of your company, that makes sense. And to your earlier point, I do think that women, people of color, gender minorities are over mentored and under sponsored. So they're not necessarily
Mm-hmm.
given, here's a stretch project that I believe you can do.
Yeah.
Right. I think there is some like project allocation stuff that can be tricky. I think project allocation can be a vector, like a bias vector,
Mm-hmm.
because sometimes it's like the loudest person raising their hand that gets the most interesting project. So there's that piece. But I definitely think there could be more coaching from managers. Or if a manager doesn't have the bandwidth, like a company can be like, we don't have the bandwidth to actually coach you, and we're sorry, but you can use your professional development to find yourself a coach to
Mm-hmm.
help you, right? Because sometimes the manager being your coach can be tricky depending on like how political your engineering organization is.
Mm-hmm.
I had a friend once tell me that I should consider my manager like a sports agent, that they get 10% of like the cut. You know what I mean? Like, okay, like they're trying to help you and that's their job and everything, but like if you do really well, then it reflects well on them. So they kind of get
Mm-hmm.
like 10% of the shine. And I was like, oh, that's a really good point.
Oh, well, that could be a good selling point for them to
Mm-hmm.
invest in external
Mm-hmm.
coaching if that's what's best for you, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I think it also, especially in sort of like the high growth startup space or in the general startup scene, everyone's just moving super fast,
Yeah.
and so sometimes there's not a thought towards investment.
And especially for junior and mid-level engineers,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like
Mm-hmm.
managers, yeah, like leaders, execs. And this, I saw a lot of this when I was doing coaching, like kind
Mm-hmm.
of the mid-level and below, like didn't get a
Mm-hmm.
lot, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
especially, I don't know, I talked to one company who they're like, yeah, it would be great if you could coach, our 1 out of 12 engineering manager who's a woman, the only woman. I was like, okay. And then I was like down for it. I was like, yeah, I want to support her. And they came back and were like, we don't have budget for coaching because we spent all of our diversity budget on sending people to Grace Hopper, right? I'm like, that is a totally different, that's a
Just
totally different, like, why is this coming out of a diversity budget just because she's a woman, right? Like,
yeah, maybe that. I mean, maybe everything about that story, I'm baffled. Make it make sense. Um, yeah, that's wild. But then that also reveals the thinking around this kind of stuff too.
yeah,
And I think everyone is so eager to hire senior people because they won't need support. And it's not to say that senior people don't need support, um, but where do senior people come from? They don't just come
yeah.
out of the womb,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And some people who are really ambitious will take on that training for themselves. You know, when I was coming up, and felt kind of more insecure in my technology skills, I spent a lot of evenings at meetups studying, things, reading blog posts, going to conferences, and sort of trying to get that information that I couldn't get at work for myself. But not everybody
Mm-hmm.
is like that, nor should everybody be expected to be like that. That's not
Yeah.
something that should rest on my shoulders, but because I wasn't where I wanted to be, I felt that was the work I had to do.
Right. Yeah, I particularly like to mentor and manage junior, like new grad
Mm-hmm.
hires, because like they're so eager, they're like pretty
Yeah.
malleable. And there's just
Yeah.
some basic things around like how do you be an employee, right? Like we like analyzed people's PTO and we're like, they're not taking PTO because they
Mm.
always have their breaks built into their school schedules, right? And so we had to
Mm-hmm.
go and be like, hey, like you should take PTO and like plan a break and
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
go somewhere or have a staycation. I was like, oh,
Yeah.
like you just kind of get them on the right trajectory and it's like
Yeah.
you catch them early. But yeah,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
found it really rewarding.
I had a mentee ask me, how do I leave a job? And I was like, oh, right, you haven't done this before. Just some of these basic things. Um,
Yeah.
and that's fine. And I also think one of the things that's nice about people who are coming up in their career, like you said, they are eager, they are
Hmm.
hungry. And it kind of reminds me of what I
Hmm.
liked about the sector. Because I was that way once
Yeah.
before the jaded stuff set in,
Hmm.
And it does kind of remind me like, oh, right, like people do want to be here. And this is an interesting
Hmm.
and dynamic industry. And seeing it through sort of the eyes of a newcomer can kind of
Mm-hmm.
reignite that love and interest.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's also what I get out of it in a lot of ways, too,
Mm-hmm.
more than just sort of being who I needed when I was younger.
Right. If you think back to when you were a junior, a mid-level
Mm-hmm.
engineer, is there anything that someone like anything meaningful that someone did for you or said to you or supported you?
I mean, the thing that comes to mind is actually when I got the bump to staff. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Mark Headland, I was interviewing at MailChimp and I was like, oh, I need to find a new role, whatever. And he'd been, as you know, as a manager, recruitment is a
Mm-hmm.
long game. So he'd been trying to recruit me for years at that point. And I was like, no, I'm going to stay here and figure it out, which is very much my vibe. I'm like, let me stay here till I can't in a particular
Mm-hmm.
role. I don't like, I don't like interviewing. And one of the things he did was I was like, okay, like I'm a senior engineer now, like, which senior in the tech sector is the mid-level title. And
Mm-hmm.
it makes me, ooh, that's the mid-level title. Staff is the actual senior title, or at least one of
Well,
the,
because you got to give some you got to give people something to work towards when they're like
Mm-hmm.
just
Mm-hmm.
software engineer, right?
Yeah, yeah. So it's like, oh, senior title. I'm like, that's not. You're just mid level.
Mhm.
So what I was a senior engineer at the time, and I was like, okay, like I'd like to apply, whatever. And he was like, great, I'm going to put you in a staff. And I was like, what? And he's like, yeah,
Mm.
you're there. You've
Mhm.
been doing the work, and I can see it. And so it was like the first time where I felt
Mm.
not gaslit, that I had
Yeah.
expertise, that I did know what I was doing, because to date
Yeah.
no one had said you're really good at X as a
Right.
manager or someone who has been around the block. So it was
Mhm.
really affirming.
Yeah. And like a lot of people actually have the opposite experience where it's like
Hmm.
you've been at this level, like let's bring you in at this level and you can work your way into
Yes.
this role, right? Which
Which
is
is such a
infuriating.
trap. It's such a trap. It steals time from people. Time is not a renewable resource. And then
Yeah.
a lot of times people don't make that next leap and have to go and make a
Right.
lateral move into a company just to be leveled to where they should have been coming in.
Right.
I had a
Because then
friend.
you're going through the leveling, like checking off all the boxes rather
Mm-hmm.
than, oh, this person just came in interviewing for this level. And like, if people
Yeah.
are like, sounds good.
Yeah, it's so much different level setting. And I think one of the things I experienced in my career was promos became highly charged and highly political. And I worked at a place where managers wouldn't put you up for promo unless it was a slam dunk. Like they didn't want to
Mm,
expend any of their social capital for things they might need later by just putting up anybody. So only when it was like
mm,
beyond obvious to other people would they put some. I mean, the only person I know that didn't do that at that particular company was like a woman, person of color, who was like, nah, whatever, I'll put you up. I don't care. We'll keep going until you get it, which was great.
mm.
And because of that, she had such a loyal throng of engineers who reported to her, and people would fight to stay in her reporting chain.
Wow.
Hmm.
Wow.
So, and I mean, people didn't get it. And I was like, I get it. That's someone who believes in you. Why wouldn't you go to the ends of the earth for this person? If I would work for this person again, I reported her for a little while. So,
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So it sounds like Mark Headland really sponsored you and whatever social capital like that comes from a different bucket of social capital than
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
manager and putting you up for
For promo,
promotion and
yeah, and
advocating.
yeah, and to him, he was like, oh, that was really small. I just made sure that they were
Yeah.
going to do the right thing, and I was like, okay. But then later, I found out he
It's
pre-negotiated my
huge.
offer. So,
Oh.
yeah, Mark Headland, man of
Mark
the people,
Headland, what a guy.
one of the all-time greats. So I have a lot of respect and admiration for Mark.
Yeah. Well, what about so there are like individuals. Have you seen any company processes or things that are like not, the goodwill of one person that you feel like would really benefit junior and mid-level eng?
No, everything I'm seeing to date has been grassroots stuff by ICs,
Yeah.
or one or two people who are like, I'm empowered enough to do X thing. It's never been
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, we're a company doing this. And to be fair, I have not worked at every place under the sun. I'm sure
Mm-hmm.
there are places that do have these kinds of programs, but generally, no. It's always been like a group of a concerted effort by individuals or individual contributors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It seems like a huge area that's like, I mean, there are a lot of junior and mid-level engineers, and they're doing
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the work,
The
right? They're
work.
doing they're
Mm-hmm.
doing a lot of the
Mm-hmm.
work, and so it's a really high impact. Like, if you can find
Yeah.
some way to support them, like, Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I was working at a place, and a person had come in as a staff engineer and like wanted to talk to me at the time. I was senior, and I was like, sure, you can talk to me. Like I'm just, I'm just a puppy on the internet, but sure. And one of the things she said, she was like, "Oh, the senior engineers here hold up the sky." I'm like, "Yeah, they're doing that work because they're hoping to get noticed and hoping to make it to that next level. And then once you
Mm-hmm.
get to staff, which has been I've heard it as a career sustaining level, people are
Mm-hmm.
not as hungry or putting in that kind of work.
Got
um,
it.
so
Yeah.
it's definitely disheartening, because I think those are the people that, if you just give a little attention to, can really
Mm-hmm.
thrive. And it just seems so short-sighted to me. But I also, we're in an industry that isn't necessarily thinking about the long term, and
Yeah.
it's really hard to tie, oh, I mentored this engineer, to say business goals, impact,
Right.
whatever, right?
Especially since mentorship is often right, it's not management, like I
Mm-mm.
was managing this person and they did this.
Mm-hmm.
Mentorship is often this like, dotted line, like, oh, we
Mm-hmm.
meet every once in a while, or like
Mm-hmm.
I had an eye out for this person and the opportunities
Mm-hmm.
that might be good, and it's hard to like
Mm-hmm.
really quantify that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's, which is, I think, so many things that aren't like easily quantifiable, I think, in this
Mm-hmm.
particular sector, just get sort of thrown out,
Yeah.
I
So
think
what
there's a,
about
yeah.
if you had like for engineering managers who do have junior and mid-level folks on their team,
Mm-hmm.
which most do,
Mm-hmm.
and they want to better support and coach
Mm-hmm.
and advocate for these folks, like
Mm-hmm.
what advice would you give them?
Just remember that they don't know. They don't. I've reported to people who have a ton of time under their belt, and I think it's really easy to forget what it was like to be in that position, what it was
Yeah.
like when you were first coming up. And if I think a lot of times people don't know. It's like having spinach in your teeth and no one telling you, And
Mm-hmm.
so, yes, maybe it'll come across as condescending, but sometimes people just need to be like, hey, do you know to do X thing?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think people are like being people are not purposely doing badly, you
Yeah.
know? So
Everyone's trying their best in their own
everyone's
way.
trying their best. And if they need to be redirected, you've got to figure out some way to do that. And I think people are always like, well, I
Mm-hmm.
told them. I'm like, did you tell them in a way that they could hear you? Communication
Mm-hmm.
doesn't happen how I speak, it's how this person hears. So,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Or
you know.
even like if you see someone do something, their behavior is weird or
Mm-hmm.
something, to say something, right, rather than if
Mm-hmm.
it's a super senior person, you might think like, oh, that's kind of
They
their
have a
behavior, or they've
reason.
learned
Yeah.
it, that like they're ill-intentioned or whatever. But for
Mm-hmm.
you're saying for more junior folks, like just kind of assume the best, they're trying their best, they may just not know that what they're
Yeah.
doing is like not okay.
Yeah, or needs to be slightly shifted, or maybe isn't
Mm-hmm.
required right now. I think there's just um, a real. Did you see that thread from like Marco Rogers where he talks about like not everybody has the concept of real talk, where you just
Mm-hmm.
sort of drop the premise and you just say what's happening? I think
Mm-hmm.
there's been I've worked at like nice engineering organizations where people won't just level
Yeah.
with you and be direct,
Right.
and so I come from a culture where, being direct, critique a love language. Okay. My
Mm.
dad used to tell me if I didn't love you, I wouldn't tell you. So, and I
Oh,
think there's
okay.
not a lot of room for, like, I view critique as a loving action, and I
Mm-hmm.
think there's not,
Yeah.
if I didn't care, I wouldn't say anything, I
Yeah.
would just, keep moving.
Yeah. I think it's the difference between being kind and being nice,
Mm-hmm.
right? Nice, you're kind of
Mm-hmm.
just like trying not to rock the boat, but being kind
Mm-hmm.
could be like, look, in these areas you're doing great, and this is the one thing that's holding you back, and like this is the
Yeah.
perception people have of you, and so like just try this
Yeah.
thing instead, right?
Yeah, that would save. I mean, if someone had done that to me like 3, 4 years ago, I would have
Mm-hmm.
appreciated it so much, and I would have modified my behavior. I would have responded well
Mm-hmm.
to that.
Yeah.
But that's not always the intervention that you get.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think people are afraid of having those difficult conversations for sure. So more
Yeah.
training perhaps
Hmm.
to
Yeah,
around
and
that.
also the more you have a difficult conversation, the more you're like, whatever. At least for me, for a long time I would avoid conflict, but now I'm sort of like, whatever. I'm going to wade into it. It's fine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and
Um,
people appreciate it. I think people really
hmm.
they recognize that. I mean, even if you're like, I'm a little bit nervous to have this conversation, and I'm not sure how
Hmm.
you're going to receive it, and that kind of helps
Hmm.
take off, like kind of smooth over the conversation a
Yeah,
little bit.
yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know. Don't you want people to do well? I don't know. I feel like I'm also maybe cut from a different cloth where I am. I try to be highly engaged at work. I know not everybody is highly engaged at work. Some people are discontented. Some people are actively spreading that discontent. But my
Mm-hmm.
mind is sort of like, I get one time on this planet. So if I'm doing something, I want to be doing it.
Mm-hmm.
We don't, it's, time isn't a renewable resource, So
Yeah. Well,
if
thank
I'm
you
going
so
to do it,
much.
I
I
want to do it to the best of my
love,
ability. Yeah.
yeah, I love your vision of, it's not success if I'm the only one there. And so,
Mm-mm.
yeah,
No,
I hope,
no.
I hope to, yeah, let me know if there's any way I can help you support more
Yeah.
people. And I definitely
Yeah.
share that vision.
Yeah. Just bring a gang, bring a squad.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much for joining me
Yeah.
today.
Of course. It's great to be here.
Yeah. Have a good rest of your day.
You too.